Good afternoon, everyone. Live from Silicon Valley, California. This is Success Sadhana, and I'm really very happy and delighted to welcome you all to our program today. A little space in the middle of the day to pause, breathe, and reconnect with ourselves. So today's topic is Decide, Commit, and Become, a 10 principle guide to building unshakable determination. And we're joined by Vaish, Bhakti and Bhakti Yogi, who has been practicing Bhakti Yoga for over 50 years. And he has been helping youth and older alike throughout the world in guiding them in spiritual practices. And he has been to a long retreat in India. So, really happy and glad that he's back. Welcome back, Vaish, for another episode of Success Sadhana.
Thank you so much, Jam. No place I'd rather be, and great to see you all and continue the conversation. It's an ongoing conversation, isn't it? I was talking to Joshua yesterday, person I just met recently, and he was talking about thought clusters. And this morning, when I was driving home from a yoga class, I saw on the horizon gigantic clouds laden with water. Sometime this weekend, they'll be releasing that water on us. It's some kind of an atmospheric river coming through. And in a similar way, the ancient wisdom literatures describe how we collect our thoughts in clouds and they mass. And at some point, they pour forth. The most critical time is when we're making transitions. The greatest of all transitions is when we leave this present body, which is imminent, considering um, the fact we only get about 100 years, and in geological time, that's a moment. It's just a brief interval. And therefore, there's a way in which, while we have the opportunity, while we're in our right minds, we can specifically cultivate the kind of thoughts that are described in the Bhagavad Gita as transcendent. They're phenomenal. And we can also prepare ourselves for our daily lives in such a way that we don't overstrain ourselves or overcommit to those things that are not important. As Jim Rohn used to say, don't major in minor things. Try to find out what's most important. Of course, every philosopher has mentioned this since the beginning of times. One of the points of philosophy, especially for those who are Platonists, who say that there is an ultimate good in life. And even those who aren't describe how the process that we're in is important. So today, I'll talk about one of my favorite subject matters, which is determination. It's it's possible we might notice that determination uh, ebbs and flows. Sometimes we feel determined and sometimes we don't. So what's up with that? Also, what is determination? That's a good question to ask. Of course, I always like to ask when I'm assuming I know what a phrase means or what I'm working towards. What is it exactly? Let me get a better definition. Well, here's a breakdown of the word determination. It has the word terminus in it, which means an ending point. And there is a way we can describe determination as being able to finish what we start. Have you ever started a notebook and then only written 3 pages, and then you find it a year later amongst other stack of notebooks that only have 3 pages written upon? Or have you ever started a book and you get through the first chapter and then it goes back up on the shelf and you realize years later you only started it? Not saying that you have to finish every notebook or finish every book, but those are definitely tasks we take up that have a beginning and an end or a possible ending point. And there are many such opportunities in our life to measure whether we're able to finish the terminus, determination. We have that finishing strength. And this lifetime it has a beginning and an end. So can we make it to the end without becoming too distracted and forgetting what the ultimate purpose is? After all, philosophy is meant to bring us to that awareness of what my ultimate purpose may be. And the sages, for instance, at Naimisharanya 5,000 years ago, got together just to discuss that. What's the ultimate purpose of life? And they came up with a formula. It's to be fully conscious of the origin of everything, our original source, the ultimate object of meditation. So let's start today in this seminar. First, I'll say a few more things. Decide, commit, become. A couple of, it's like a mantra, and it's a 10 principle guide to building unshakable determination, and it's guaranteed. So if you use all of these principles and it doesn't work for you for any reason, we'll give your money back from today's session. Also, we have a few guiding points as a preamble. One is the world's built for distraction, not direction. And we may notice that this kind of distraction, considering what I just said about an ultimate goal of life, may mean that people are trying to sell us stuff. And therefore, we get distracted by the latest style or a specific kind of new superfood or whatever it may be. And there are ways in which we may be in a maelstrom, a storm of different ideas. Otherwise, they could be considered distractions. So most people start strong, but they quit early, not from lack of talent, but from lack of systems. So that's why we have a 10-point guidance system for developing determination and staying on track. And finally, determination outperforms skill, luck, and motivation in the long run. One of my favorite points. So that's a preamble to what we're going to be talking about today. But first, since JM mentioned, I've been away for a while, 7 weeks to be exact. And on my way back, I met one of those yogis from the Himalayas. I'm not signing off yet. And took some classes in pranayama. And the yogi convinced me. They said in every session, you can do without food for a while, you can do it without water for a while, but only for a couple of minutes can you do without breath. And I thought it would be helpful today because we're in the middle of the day. This is a sandhya. There are various intervals during the day that are specially meant for regrouping. And one of the ways to do that is through calibrating our breath. So if you're all up for it, I'm going to put on some background. And if you take a moment to sit up a little bit straighter than you were a second ago, and relax but keep an alert mind, please close your eyes. And we're going to do a very simple exercise in breathing, which is to inhale for 4 seconds and exhale for 6 through your nostrils. And just keep a count of 4 in and 6 out. And you'll notice that it starts to slow down your mind and bring some sense of life into your whole body. We're getting proper amount of oxygen. And I'll begin by counting, and then you can count on your own. We'll start on the inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. And exhale for 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And please continue at your own pace. 4 in, 6 out. Two more. And now just resume your normal breath. And we'll come back into the Zoom room. Now that we have enough oxygen going through our brains, let's take a moment to talk about determination. So, the first of the principles is something that seems so simple we might miss it, but it's to decide what you want and write it down. There's a way in which everything in the universe manifests from subtle and evolves to gross. Everything we see around us is an evolute, something that's grown from a thought or from subtle matter into gross matter. And we're self-determining unless we abandon our freedom. This is a subject matter Eric Fromm writes about in his book, Escape from Freedom. We have free will in the human form of life, and it's a little scary. In fact, he documents various movements in the world when people very deliberately try to break away from being free to take shelter of authoritarianism, ways in which they don't have to think so much or execute their free will. But the wisdom literatures advise us that we needn't be afraid as long as we're guided properly. That is, afraid of our own free will. And the more deliberate we are, the more successful we'll be. Deliberate and deliberate, same word, just used in different cases. So when we deliberate on the purpose of life and we decide what we want for ourselves, we can manifest it literally from the subtle, our thought process, to the grossified system of putting it down on paper, ink on paper. One of the first ways to decide what we want is to gather information. If we can't make a decision in any situation, it's because we don't have enough information. The more information we get about a situation, the more likely it is that we're able to make a decision, and hopefully an informed one. Another aspect of writing down what you want is to set a deadline. I don't know about you, but I become 3 times, 4 times as productive before I leave for a trip, especially a long one. I think of all the things that I need to take care of and put into play coming up towards the deadline. And I noticed that people in sports, for example, they'll put up a hoop and then everyone wants to throw a ball through it because it's a defined space. And if we define a specific space during which we want to achieve something, it gives us a sense of efficiency. Some people call it forced efficiency. And then make a commitment, make a strong commitment to your decision. And the word commit means carry out a pledge or bind to a certain course or policy. The word comes from Latin, committere, to join in trust, from com, with, and mittere, to put or send. So you got to push the send button by writing it down commit to your choices. So the first thing, principle of determination, is you got to know where you're going, and you get to decide. That's the nice thing about being a human being. And all it requires is a piece of paper and a pen. I personally write on really big pads, so I have plenty of room. And I get a pen that I really like, so I don't feel uncomfortable. And take time to express yourself. Think about what's inside, what's most important to you, what you want to achieve. And I'll talk more about that later. But the very physical act of writing something down, setting a deadline for it, committing to it, starts the process of developing determination. By the very definition, because there's a terminus, there's an ending point. If I ask you, I mean, I wouldn't on this show, of course, do as many push-ups as you can. You might be hesitant because you think, well, how many should I do? But I say do three, then somehow or other you'd push through on three because you know there's an ending point. So when we know what our terminus is, then we can become determined. Decide what you want and write it down. That's a good mantra to keep. Decide what you want and write it down. And decision making requires information. I like this slide so much, I don't even want to come off it, JM. Has just this alone can be life-changing, as simple as it seems. But let's go ahead and see what the next slide says. And this is a phrase we coined in one of our teams that I was working with during the pandemic. We had an international project, and it just so happens that everybody was in the same boat on the planet all at the same time. So it was kind of a controlled experiment to see, could we do something? Could we reach goals during a time when everybody was in a similar condition that was more or less locked down? And we found out the difference. In fact, I'll just say that during that period, we had one of our most prolific and productive times in the marketing that we were doing of all time, especially in the very beginning of the pandemic, actually the first 2 years. And we discerned, after thinking about it very carefully and working with lots of people on various continents, practically every continent of the world, including Antarctica, that the deciding factor was assuming that it can be done. Now, growing up, my mother used to tell me don't assume things. And it's also in a book I like. It's called The Four Agreements. The author very wisely said, don't assume things. But this is one thing you can assume. And practically, by doing this, it's metaphysical in nature because we realize that favor fortunes the bold, as I put down there. That is, when you have the audacity to assume you can do something, there are forces that come to bear, facilities to achieve come to those who start. And there's a German philosopher named Goethe who had mentioned this, that when you determinedly move forward towards a specific goal, that's when the energy comes to execute it. Not before. You have to commit, boldly commit to something. That comes in the first part. Write it down, say, I'm going to do this, and then assume that it can be done. Because all the resources are fully available in the world. It's just a matter of coagulating them, organizing them, bringing them together. It can be done through a process. And to that end, we can also consider when we're trying to do something that we're instruments. We're not the doers, but the instruments through which we can achieve something. So this assume it can be done. It's a logo. In fact, I put it on everything. I love this logo. I have it on my luggage, on my rollerboard. Here, I'll show you. I think I have it on my shoulder bag too. That's our logo. Assume it can be done. I was getting off the plane the other day and it was hanging off the back of my rollerboard. And the guy behind me caught up and said, "Hey, I like your logo. We should all think like that." And it appeals, it's appealing to assume it can be done. And that's the starting point. Now, what's the antithesis of that is to make excuses why it can't be done. And that's what we noticed during our experiment during the pandemic. Those who were successful had the audacity to assume that it could be done. And those who were not successful were ones who gave a long list or short list even of excuses why it couldn't be done. So there's a part of the mind and it's a state of heart to maybe brace yourself for failure by saying, "Oh, this is why it can't be done." But it's much more exciting and it engenders determination to say, "No, this can be done. We can do this." Start off with that attitude. So favor fortunes the bold, take some risk. The facility to achieve comes to those who start and be an instrument. So number one was decide what you want to write it down. Number two is assume it can be done. And let's look at number three. You need an attitude. And sometimes attitude indicates something pejorative, but here's what attitude means. This is the exact definition of attitude. A settled way of thinking or feeling about someone or something, typically one that is reflected in a person's behavior. It's a very helpful definition, don't you think? I'll read it again. A settled way of thinking or feeling about someone or something, typically one that is reflected in a person's behavior. Mm-hmm. So it comes from attitudine, which means posture. How do you hold yourself? What is the posture of your mind and how do you feel it in your chest? How do you stand up and move forward despite obstacles? Requires an attitude. Here are a few attitudes. In fact, I've done a whole seminar on attitudes, and they're very recognizable, especially I take them from historical figures who have achieved much and then try to analyze what was their attitude. So if here's one of them, I'm sick and tired. Like my friend Dave Dibburn, when I was in junior high school, he was an avid musician, played the flute. And one summer night, when I was in my family home in Lafayette, California, and we heard somebody bounding up our steps. It was Dave Dibburn, who lived one street away. He had his flute in one hand, and he didn't even knock. He just opened the door and came in. And we were close enough. He was a friend of our whole family. And he just burst in, and he had shaved his head. And he said, he held his flute up and he said, "That's it. I'm not messing around anymore. I'm going to learn to play the flute." And then he turned around, closed the door, almost slamming it, and ran down the steps again. And Dave's attitude was he was sick and tired of messing around and being mediocre. He became a really good flautist, and it was based on his attitude. And I'm sick and tired. No more mediocrity. I'm going to lean into this. Another attitude, and attitudes can carry us. That's how let's see what it said. Attitude means it's reflected in our behavior. You first get an attitude, then your behavior will be driven by that. Another attitude is generosity or is gratefulness. When you feel grateful and you want to express that gratitude, It's very powerful that you feel that you've been given much and you'd like to give back, which leads to a third one, which is an attitude of service for service, or we call selfless service. There are many more attitudes, but they can be noticeable. They are noticeable, the attitude. They're, I should say, definable. And we can define which attitude is most motivating for us and then inculcate that in ourselves. For instance, with gratitude, I've been studying the subject a little bit lately because I'm writing something, and one of the essays on gratitude, I found that it's a revealing emotion because it indicates that someone has intentionally done something for us. Now, someone might say, "Oh, the universe gave me a new car," but which part of the universe? What was it? That an impersonal force. We can't have gratitude for an impersonal force because there's no intention. There has to be a conscious being. And so naturally, gratitude connects us to the idea that there's reciprocity in the world, in the universe, and so forth, and it's coming intentionally to us. And so it's a source of self-realization, and it's also builds an awareness of the personal presence of the divine in the world that we can be motivated by. And selfless service, this is one of the main attitudes that is recommended in the ancient wisdom literatures, which is practice serving without any expectation of reward. It may sound unfulfilling in the context of consumerism or capitalism, systems during which people had more of a sense in history of working for a higher cause. In fact, in times when people worked in guilds and that was their main profession and they focused on excellence, they were guaranteed a certain amount of income and they they weren't motivated that much to collect to uh, amass capital. They were satisfied with a life in which they were doing their level best. If you augment that and come to a point, an attitude of serving for the sake of serving, this is an attitude that can fuel your action. And you'll notice it in people who have that. They're very uplifting to be around, and they feel similarly uplifted by that attitude. So our attitude will determine how determined we are to carry on. I'm done with mediocrity. Has anybody ever had that inspiration that that's it? That's the last time I show up unprepared, or I can't stand being substandard. I want to prepare myself to be better in the next time. This can be very motivating and makes us determined. Those are 3 points. There's a lot in those three. Maybe I won't reveal all 10 today because there's a lot in these three that we could discuss. Let's see if we can expand them and go more deeply within any of these three. And then there'll be a cliffhanger about what the other ones are. Who would like to comment? Go ahead, Vicky.
Thank you. We recently started doing training sessions at work, which have been nerve-wracking, but part of the feedback that I received is they say, or my manager said, you can keep taking punches, but it doesn't mean that you're losing as long as you don't tap out. And so that really helps me a lot. And I like the point, assume it can be done, because it's not a bet, but a faith and conviction that I will rise to the occasion. I'm going to get punched and knocked down, and I'll probably let myself down in the process, but it's the point that I'll try. And I also wanted to share two things that I thought you might enjoy. James Clear in Atomic Habits, he made this graph. So on the uh, y-axis, it says improvement or decline. On the x-axis, it's uh, time progression. And there's an exponential growth curve up that's 1% better every day. So he talks about the power of tiny gains. And then there's an exponential curve down that's 1% worse every day. And he calculated 1.01 to the 365th power is 37.78. So if you just make a tiny gain every day, by the end of the year, you're 37% better. Whereas if you're 1% worse every day, that's 0.99 to the 365th power, and that's 0.03 or 3% worse by the end of the year. And I know that you always say you're either going forward or backwards, you're constantly moving. And in line with what you shared from Teddy Roosevelt about the man on the battlefield, Calvin Coolidge also had a quote that a former VP of sales shared with me to inspire us. And he said, "Nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The slogan Press On has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race." So that was really intimidating for me when he shared it, but it was extremely helpful.
As were all your comments. You gave a plethora of useful ways to think about these principles. Thank you very much, Vicky. Fantastic. JM, did we catch all of those?
It's
We
being
need
translated.
we need to collect them all. I
Yeah,
still
it is.
write them down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have.
We'll go back and extract those. They're very important.
Yes, I did transcribe. Yeah. So Bhakta Mate is next.
Hare Krishna, Vaishesha Maharaj. I feel I have caught myself when we get a attitude, when we adopt an attitude. I feel myself sometimes judging the external performance of our actions and other people's actions. So how can we be situated in the right consciousness without comparing ourselves uh, and other people to that process?
What a great question. Because that can engender a sense of demotivation. Or I'll just say it more simply. We can feel demotivated. And we can also feel jealous or even envious when we see people doing better than us. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about equanimity. And when we attend to our own goals and processes and become very aware of how we're doing, how we're feeling, we may also notice that all the intelligence we need is abundantly available to move forward in what we're doing. There's a kind of serendipity in the world. And there's an abundance. I know that word is sometimes overused, but when we have self-realization, that is, we have an awareness that what we are is more important than what we have. And we're talking in terms of making goals, trying to attain something. The ultimate attainment is an awareness that we're non-physical. We're the ones animating the physical world around us, including our bodies. What is that? Who are we? This is what is advocated for in all the wisdom literatures, to be aware of yourself, be self-contained and self-aware. And when we do analyze who we are by our own observation and by the guidance of various wisdom literatures that describe how there's lower and higher energy, and we're part of the higher energy that is consciousness, there's a sense of immediate satisfaction. in knowing what we are. Because as we interact with the external world, it's easy enough to compare results with other people. And so much of that is governed by the momentum that other people have. And the sense of satisfaction is I have enough. In fact, I have more than enough. That's why gratitude is an extremely powerful emotion to develop. And when we also notice that the world is all accommodating, this is one of the main points in the Bhagavad Gita and elsewhere. In fact, there's a phrase from one of the very, very old literatures written in Sanskrit that says, Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam Eko Bahunam Yo Vididhati Kaman. Or the world is accommodating us at every step. And therefore, when we attend to our own refinement, the more refined we become, which means that we have a penchant for selfless service and so forth, the more we'll realize that we're living in a sea of abundance. And that means we don't have to worry about what other people are getting or not getting or how far ahead they are of us, supposedly. We can be self-contained and appreciative. Actually, that's one of the points that is in this deck, and that is work from your own strength. That is, everyone has a situation they're in right now, and you can't leapfrog into other situations without working on yourself and your process. And so it's good enough to be who you are and to be where you are and become absorbed in that. So that's one way that I've dealt with that gnawing sense that how come, well, people are doing it better, faster, more eloquently. So be yourself. And that's the natural, in that, there's a natural sense of satisfaction. Okay, JM.
We have Charles back. Welcome back, Charles.
Hey,
Please go.
Charles.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm really enjoying enjoying being back, and I love this topic as well. And all the insights that have been shared. Just had a quick question here about um, other than with maybe like sheer willpower, do you have any practical tips, advice for, when, maybe you start out with determination, you're staying disciplined, putting in the work, you know, making progress, but, then you experience some failures, there's setbacks. Any practical suggestions you have for continuing to stay determined, other than relying on sheer willpower, which can, be fleeting, especially in moments of failure or setback?
Yeah, definitely. And the first is to redefine what failure is and redefine what a setback is. We're free to do that. And when we take up metaphors like failure is the pillar to success, we're less likely to be demotivated by them and lose our determination. There are, it's a prominent philosophy nowadays for those who are progressive, fail forward fast. And then, of course, there's anecdotes of those who have achieved much, but they've failed repeatedly also in order to get there. And so, what does failure mean? It's part of the investigative process of moving forward in any realm, in any discipline. And if you start to play an instrument, you're looking for failure points. In fact, I noticed this in practicing music. I have a teacher, and I want to have points at which I'm not able to cross a certain bridge because that's what I want to bring to my teacher. And so I'm actually hankering for those. Let me hit a spot that I can't cross over myself so I can bring it back to somebody who can guide me on that. And I'll give you an example. There's a I do some training for people who are engaged in a particular activity. And we have a saying as I'm training them that you're not going out to actually do the activity. We're just going to touch the pavement. So we're going out to the place where we're going to start, but you don't have to do anything. The only achievement you have to attain is walking out the door. That means start, get out there, and then you touch the pavement and you're done. And it's amazing to me that the more you take the expectation away from people, during the seminars, I'll say, no heroics necessary. You don't have to perform, no jumping through a hoop of fire. All you have to do is just show up and touch the pavement, and then you're done. In fact, we don't even want you to do anything after that. That's it. And if you do that for yourself, you take the pressure off of, oh, I failed. You redefine it. I'm looking for those gaps, and they come naturally in process when I'm moving towards my goal. Then you'll collect them. That's very valuable to have a list of the places where you couldn't cross the bridge or you couldn't cross the river. You need a bridge to get across. That's when you can really start to build your roadway to success because now you have a clear idea where the gaps are. So my main point here is redefine what you consider to be failure and redefine what success is on the other side of the coin. Success, you could say, is you started. Let's say you had some hard phone calls to make. And if you said, I have to convince somebody of something, that's a hard thing to do, convince people to do things. And you make the phone call anyway. And then you didn't convince him. He's like, oh, I failed. I was like, just make it, okay, I made the call. And then that's my that's my success. And or you could even switch it to, I want to get 10 people in a row to say no, and as rudely as possible. That's your prerogative. You could redefine it. It's like, yeah, let me make a list. I've done process before when I had to do some really hard activities all by myself without a team. I made a list of 6 possible outcomes for interacting with people. And I would just, like an automaton, start talking to people, and then I just mark the reaction they had, which fell into one of 6 categories. And I kept all those, and I'd look at them regularly and say, it doesn't matter. I just move forward because it's always going to flesh out in the same way because it's how many times you do it. It's not how expert you are with one person or another. And I've also seen in the course of time, people were very methodical and just moved forward. Even I thought their technique was substandard, and then they surpassed what I was doing. And I thought, well, they just kept going. So that all goes to say what I said in the beginning, which is redefine what you consider to be success. It's yours to play with. And then you can be free your mind to say, this is what it looks like when I'm successful. I just do this one little thing and then I'm good and just keep doing it. Okay, I'm reviewing what we've talked about. The first thing is decide what you want and write it down. And here, I have my notebook here. I personally decided upon this Pentel. It's sleek and clear, has a cap, very dependable. No clicky action. I have to actually turn, and I hate that when I put it in my pocket and then it clicks open and then I get ink spills out. This one, it's either closed or open and fits my hand. Now I'm going to reveal my notebook. This is actually a sketch pad. It's called Bianfang. That's a big pad, don't you think? And when I'm traveling, I'm going to try to travel light, but I always bring my notebook, even though it's such a behemoth. It's got 40 pages and it's mixed media paper. I could paint on this if I wanted to. And it absorbs it nicely. And then I have plenty of space to think on paper. And so I advocate for finding this kind of system where there's no distraction. It's just you, your pen and paper, and what you want to manifest, you put on the page. And if you take the time to decide what you really want and you write it down, a miracle is occurring. There are no other species that can write proficiently. Human beings have syntax. Even Coco, the gorilla, had a lot of vocabulary but no syntax. It's miraculous what the human brain can do, and this is one of the way of manifesting. And the other is the process of gathering information. Here's another prop that I use regularly. It's on my desk. It's framed, actually. I keep it in front of me constantly. And this is a book writing tip because I like to write. I find it a form of self-realization to stay in the writing process. And this is a tip I got um, many years ago from a woman named Vicky Hetz. I can't even pronounce her last name. It's Hitzges. Here's what she says. Would you like to hear this? If not, just turn off your sound. I'll be done in a minute. It says, if you want to write a nonfiction book, don't focus on quote unquote writing a book. Instead, focus on one, gathering information, two, creating fresh ideas, three, organizing your material, four, dividing the material into chapters. You won't feel intimidated and your book will seem more doable. So the four stages, the first one is gathering information. So this is one of the stages of determination. Be informed about what's good for you and where you want to go. Then when you write down what your goals are, you'll be well informed. So that's our first stage. Coming up towards the end of the year, it's really a nice time because there's an end to the period of time that we designate as a year, full revolution of the sun and so forth. And then we have this opportunity to start over. In fact, that's why the holidays are here. It's this time of year is traditionally from the Roman Empire called Saturnalia. It's a worship of Saturn. And also it was a celebration of renewal because the darkest day comes and then it shifts. It goes back into extending the time of day. So there are big celebrations. The Christian holiday got moved to that time so that it could be part of all the celebrating. There is also some, anyway, that time of year really is a time that everybody notices that you can restart. So I highly recommend taking the opportunity to use your amazing human capability to decide what you want and write it down. And then as soon as you write a deadline next to the items, you'll notice that you get that sense of pleasant sense of urgency that I got to get it done. I have several goals. I wrote them down at the beginning of the year, and I'm just realizing, even right now, that I still have some work to do. I'm looking for them. I have them in the back of my other notebook that I didn't take with me on my trip because it was a little heavy. But uh, I do have a digital aspect of it. I took a picture of the goals that I wrote down, and they're now coming, it's coming into this compression period near the end of the year of, okay, deadline is looming. So I have some excitement when I wake up in the morning that I know where I'm going. I know what I have to do to finish the year strong. I have some determination based on this first thing, which is gathering information, setting deadline, and then committing. Anybody have a notebook they write on? Favorite pen? The only thing doing this, yes, Manu.
Yes, I was just remembering like a few weeks back, I was just like I also had written down the goals this year, and the end, the last quarter of this year, I had some goals written, but then there were a lot of hiccups, and I was thinking, should I even like move forward? But then just what you mentioned that like just writing down helps. So looking at my goals, then I had to work on it. It was constantly there in my head, and I had to take it out, and then I saw that it was actually happening. Like I just had to take some effort. Like last year we had done some 2000 book packs, and then I had the same goal this year. So I was, but then there was less help because one of my colleagues is still outside the country, and then I was thinking how will it happen, but just looking at the goal just pushed me to work on it.
I find it's uncanny when I write goals down, even if I don't look at them, they're in my subconscious, and somehow or other they come to pass. I once, when I was much, much younger, and I had been living in a monastery, an ashram, for many years, and I was on my way to India, and I stopped to see my parents, and I had a list of goals, and I accidentally left it there, and they read them, and they were a little taken aback because they thought it was way too ambitious, and they wanted to soften the impact of, what I might run into if I had such ambitious goals. Because they thought I hadn't engaged with the world very much, therefore, perhaps I was being idealistic. But I still have that. And it's amazing how all of them came to pass, and they were very ambitious. And I hadn't seen it for a long time, but it's still in my mind when I wrote those down. That's the indelible aspect of this exercise of writing down on paper. It goes right into your subconscious that this is what I want to do. And as humans, we have that sense of direction, especially when we think it over very clearly and commit to it on paper. When something's on paper, in fact, when I meet people for marketing, we ask them, you know, make a goal, and they'll say a goal, say, no, you have to write it on paper. I can see they get really hesitant. And as soon as they write the number and slide it over to me, then I say, okay, you can feel the energy in the room change. Everything starts to, the ideas start to come into their minds, and they feel uplifted. My teacher used to say that you should always create a fresh challenge, especially this was in context of building community. You should always build a fresh challenge so that everyone wants to rise up and meet it. Fresh challenge. And so we need that.
Hello.
Yes, Wolf.
Sorry, it's the
Not at
phone.
all. Please go ahead.
I was answering the phone. I'm so sorry.
We'll put us on with whoever's there. We'll talk.
Not yet, not yet.
Okay. All
Sorry.
right. Thanks, Wolf. Okay, so that's one thing I've been hammering during this session because it's elusively simple. And Manish, are you putting your hand up right now? Okay, no. The second one is remembering that fortune favors the bold, and that the facility to achieve comes to those who start. And I just go back to, here's an anecdote. When I wrote my first book, I had never written a book, obviously. That's why it's my first book. And I had an editor, excellent editor. And I say she's excellent because she is, but part of her excellence is she was very encouraging and understood what I was getting myself into in writing a book. And so she kept asking me for some samples of what I was writing, but I was writing it in my head. I had all these ideas, and I had pieces of paper with ideas written on them and so forth. So she said, "Send me something." And each time she said that, I thought, I don't have anything tangible. And when I started actually writing, I thought, this is much harder than thinking about it. But that's when all the energy started and all the miracles started happening, is when I really started writing, despite the fact that I felt unqualified and over my head and something that I couldn't really do. And that's one of the reasons to do things, is to realize your capacity. It's much more than we think, and we never get there unless we actually start. So that's where fortune favors the bold. Is, you see people all the time and they're interviewed and like, what's your qualification? It's like, I really don't have a qualification. I just did it. I was bold enough to start, and and then realize that you're an instrument. The energy comes through you when you're doing it. And the third principle we talked about, leaving 7 on the board here, JM, for next week and the week after, is adopt an attitude that fuels your action. Get yourself an attitude, everybody, and know what it is, because that's what pushes you, is your attitude. So if you want a Dave Dibbern attitude, then shave your head. And go to your neighbor and burst in the door and say, I'm sick and tired of being mediocre. I'm not going to do it anymore. Is that going to be your attitude? Okay, maybe. Or gratitude could be your prevailing attitude. But one thing's for sure, an attitude is not inconsequential. It actually is what makes us move. It's how we show up in life. And the last one, that was the last one that we talked about. There are 7 more fantastic more principles I can't wait to share with you, but you got to tune in next week. Jam, let's clean up whatever we left behind on the board.
Yeah, there are a few on the board. So first is Zila said, if you are always right and don't fail, how do you learn or grow?
Yeah, I want to comment on that because it's such an excellent point she made. Learning language. If you want to learn a language, you got to make mistakes. That's how you learn. And when babies learn a language, they just blabber out whatever they heard somebody else say and point to something. It could be completely wrong, but that's when they refine how they speak. And I remember being corrected by my mother or father so many times, saying things in the wrong tense or making the wrong word. And one of the reasons people who take up a second language don't learn it is because they're afraid to say the wrong thing, so they don't say anything. You have to be loquacious and just move forward and don't worry and try to make mistakes, as many as possible. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, Zila also commented that it matters also if you are determined from sattva. Same idea, I think.
It sure does, and that's a whole nother topic. What a great point. Thank you.
And Vicky wanted to know the 6 categories of automation you attempted, of how people respond. And Charles summarized the talk nicely, actually. I think. Thank you, Charles.
He said, gather information, decide what you want, write it down, add a deadline, redefine failure and success. Just start, commit, always have a fresh challenge. 1% better each day came from James Clear through Vicky. Fortune favors the bold came from Goethe. Have an attitude of determination, gratitude, and service. Oh, and the universe is all accommodating. That's a good thing to remember. If you meditate on whatever I have now, it's an accommodation for whatever the way I've conducted myself in the world. Om Purnam Adapurnam. The world's perfectly accommodating whatever we want. So if you don't like what you have, then you can just change your trajectory by changing what your desires are and what your attitude is and so forth. Well, now I have to report to you, JM, that I did meet a real yogi, and he has spent time in the Himalayas. I met him in a different context. I didn't go to the Himalaya this time. I was in another place in an eco village in Maharashtra, and there were some real yogis hanging around there. So one of them I captured and just had some sessions with him on this pranayama. And lo and behold, when we were about to leave, you're not going to believe what he did. He put his hands high in the air, just like we've been doing here and just like I said. And he said, Hari Bol, which means keep the transcendental vibration going. So I'm doubling down on it since we have to go now. It's 1:01. Hari Bol.
Haribo!
Good to see everybody. Thank you very much. Stay
Thank
tuned
you.
for the next parts. You're going to love them.